Let's just start this off by talking about you're beginning a search for a mining site in the Kilgore area. It's focused on about 17,000 acres that's 20 miles northeast of Dubois. So I guess I'm curious, first of all, what's entailed with this exploration project?
Well, let kind of digress a bit. So this area has been a known mineralized zone since the late 1930s, I think, was the original exploration prospecting by gold miners in that area. And since the early part of last century through now, there's been multiple exploration activities up there. Most of that was focused on collecting soil samples. And then there's been a number of activities with geophysical survey work that's been conducted by a number of companies over the years. And there's been quite a bit of exploration drilling as well. So when Excellon Resources acquired the project in 2020, they acquired all of that historic data as well. And for the last year and a half or so, they've been analyzing that data. And based on the information that we had, we developed an exploration plan to continue collecting data in the Kilgore project area. So what we're currently doing, based on the historic information we have, is we have a drilling program going on this year where we're drilling, it's called a diamond core drill. The diamond core drill is essentially a barrel that's about 10.5 inches in diameter, and it's bored into the rocks, and the core of rock that is produced on the inside of that core is pulled to the surface, and that core is then analyzed by the geologist to look at the rock type and any sort of structures it may have in it, say faults or fractures. And then a portion of that core is also sent off to a laboratory, and the laboratory does an analysis to determine what the mineral content is for that core. So they can tell us, what sort, if there's gold or silver or iron, it's a multispectral, so it looks for a number of different types of minerals in that rock. And once we get that information back from the laboratory, then we do a continued analysis and determine where in that drill hole that we're working on is the mineralization. So we may find that at 300 meters or maybe 900 feet down at depth, there's an area that has a really high amount of gold or silver or whatever it may be down there. And we then use that information with the geophysical surveys that we have that show information from the subsurface, as well as older drill holes and the drill holes that we're planning to develop a three-dimensional model of how the mineralization exists in the subsurface in the area. So we just started this year on a 3 to 5 year exploration program where we are drilling, and we're also conducting some geophysical work to continue to develop that three-dimensional model at the subsurface and determine what the concentration of minerals are at the subsurface. And ultimately, if there's enough mineralization there, that it would be feasible, economically feasible, to pursue it. 3 to 5 years from now, we don't know what the price of gold is going to be. It's about $1,800 an ounce now. Depending on how much is there, determination needs to be made in the future whether or not it's economically feasible to pursue it or not. So right now, our efforts are exploration and collecting all of that data that will then lead into that economic analysis.
So it's a 3 to 5 year process that you're doing this exploration, but at this particular site, how long will the drilling last?
Well, in the area that we have, the drilling starts annually. Our field season starts July 15th, and then it ends on November 15th. If the weather allows it, and there's not a significant amount of snow or mud, that sort of thing, we actually can extend our season to December 15th at the approval of the Forest Service. So we have a 5 to 6 month window every year that we conduct the exploration. So within this project area, most likely we're looking at probably 3 to 5 years, just because we have such a short amount of time every year to be able to conduct that exploration activity.
I see. Okay. So this search for gold, silver, whatever precious metals are found, if there is in fact, a large degree of these precious metals, when will mining actually begin?
Well, again, it really depends on what the development process is and whether or not we can determine there's enough mineralization there to make it economically feasible to move forward to do that. So based on the information we collect in the exploration period, that analysis will be conducted most likely, 3 to 5 years out when we start, concluding the exploration program. And if there is a determination that there is a significant deposit there and it is economically feasible to pursue it, then there will be a mine plan of operations that would be crafted, and that would be submitted to the Department of Interior, the Forest Service. And that would kick off an environmental impact statement process. The National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requires the federal government to do an environmental assessment of every activity going on on the Forest Service land. And so if we were to propose mining on the Forest Service land, that would require that environmental impact statement analysis through NEPA. That also requires a significant amount of environmental monitoring on all of the botany, the biology, the wildlife, fish, you name it, air quality. There's a lot of monitoring that's associated with that environmental impact statement process. Typically, those environmental analyses take upwards of 5 years to complete. So if you kind of play it out, the possibility of actually, turning a shovel of dirt to start even just to build a mine is most likely 10 years out. And I should say too, that environmental analysis or environmental impact statement process involves a significant amount of public participation as well. So there's multiple opportunities for the public to review the plans, to evaluate the Forest Service's process of evaluating the plan, and provide public comment to the Forest Service along the way as well.
So earlier you touched on there's a history of mining in at this Kilgore site where you're exploring. Do you know the history extensively?
Not so much mining, really. It's more prospecting.
Okay.
There's all sorts of anecdotal information and rumors about people going into the hills in those areas and coming back with lots of gold. We haven't seen anything documented to that effect. I mean, there are names of creeks up there like Miners Creek and those sorts of things that would suggest that there has been and still is a significant amount of gold in that country. And there are locations where we've actually seen visible gold in the stream beds in that area. But what we're looking at through our exploration is more so disseminated gold. So it's gold it tends to be almost microscopic. If you held a piece of ore or a piece of rock that had gold in it, you wouldn't see the gold. It's so finely disseminated through that rock that you really need to have a chemical analysis to determine what the level of mineralization is in that rock. So historically, there have been people who have gone in doing panning, limited mining with some small tunnels here and there. But again, that was back in the early 30s and 40s with limited abilities and tools. More recently, the companies have gone in and have been using a lot of either geophysical methods, either from aerial methods, which there's ways that they can fly over with airplanes and helicopters and collect magnetic data that way, or they use ground type methods where they go across the ground and collect data through either electrical means or through magnetic means. And so based on the information collected through the geophysics, it lets the companies know what sort of potential mineralization there is in the subsurface. And that information then allows us to target those different areas for the drilling operations that we're currently doing. So instead of just going out and randomly poking holes in the ground out there trying to hopefully hit something, go out and do the research, the geophysical research, and then we narrow those areas down to places that are most likely to have mineralization. And those are the areas that we explore with the drilling.
I'm trying to get a picture in my mind of how the actual mining process works today, you know, because I think we've all seen movies where there's these guys that are panning for gold and they build this big old, you know, mine cart shaft and they go into this mine and it's a dangerous work. But
exactly.
How does it work today in the 21st century?
So a good point. I mean, there's different ways that gold can present itself. As you said, there's a lot of historical panning where people would go to a stream and they would pan for gold, and they'd find flakes or nuggets of gold in the stream. Most of that gold that they found that way had been liberated from the rocks through erosion over the course of time. Wind and water breaks down the rocks. Gold typically is very resistant, and then it remains as the rest of the rock kind of dissolves away. So there's placer mining, as you were just talking. Well, I'm sorry, no, gold panning. The other way that historically they used to do it was placer mining, where they would go in with large hoses and they would shoot the edges of creeks down with water, and they would take all of that material and run it through sluice boxes and try to pick out the gold that way because it was much heavier than the other rocks. There's also the lode mining, where the miners would actually drill some sort of hole or shaft into a rock where they saw a surface expression that would show that there's most likely gold there. Either they would see it at the surface, or they would know by virtue of the rock that there's most likely gold associated with that. So they would tunnel into the mountain to pursue a vein. We call that vein gold instead of placer gold.
Okay.
More recently, in the last, say, 30 years or so, and primarily starting in northern Nevada, companies have been pursuing disseminated gold. And disseminated gold, as I was saying earlier, is to the point where it's microscopic. You wouldn't really even see it if you held it. But the way that is in place is, at the subsurface, there are either granitic bodies or some sort of hot rock at the subsurface. And around the edges, or around the how would you say, the rind of that area, that hot body generates a lot of fluids in the subsurface. And because gold and other precious metals typically have a very low melting point, they melt and they migrate with these fluids into the surrounding rocks. And then once that hot body cools and the surrounding rocks cool, then that liquid cools, solidifies, and then all the gold that it's carrying also solidifies in those rocks. So more recent exploration has really been looking for areas where it's obvious that there's been some sort of hydrothermal activity. And in fact, the Kilgore area is on the rim of an old caldera that's associated with the Yellowstone hotspot. So, you know, when the Yellowstone hotspot, when it was under eastern Idaho, it was generating a lot of these fluids that had these precious metals in it. And then as it moved, the hotspot moved to the east where it is presently, those fluids cooled and left the gold behind. And so the companies are looking for things like quartz outcrops, you know, things where, and quartz is, again, another mineral that flows with these subsurface fluids quite often. So the gold is associated with these silica or quartz deposits. So there's a lot of telltale signs that really lead, but it's much different than the old way of doing exploration or mining. It's much more complicated and requires a lot more scientific research to do it.
Throughout the mining process, if there is any gold or silver or things like that that are found, who is going to benefit from that?
So it depends on how you're looking at it. I mean, ultimately, you know, the the gold, or and in this case it's gold. I mean, our company does gold and silver, but in the Kilgore project, the primary objective is to pursue the gold mineralization in that area. Gold is a considerable component of the electronics industry, and it's used in a bunch of different things. Mostly people think gold and they think jewelry, and obviously it is used in jewelry, but it also has a lot of other uses in industry. Primarily electronics industry. The new green technologies that are coming out with a lot of the electronics associated with that require gold in the circuitry and those sorts of things as well. So obviously the beneficiaries of this are going to be corporations who need to use gold. And they're looking at domestic supplies, which would be good to have that coming from our own country instead of relying on foreign countries for gold. But also the beneficiaries, should this move forward, would really be more of the local folks in the county and eastern Idaho. Clark County, where this project is located, has less than 900 people in the entire county. And so if this project were to move forward and it were to come to the point where there would be a mine developed, there's a lot of opportunities for the community and the county, the communities in the county, to benefit from a lot of the economic impact of people moving in and purchasing a lot of goods and services in that area. There's also opportunities in the future that people who have the necessary expertise or knowledge can be hired on locally as well. A mine, other than just miners, I mean, there's a lot of engineering that goes on, a lot of heavy equipment, administrative, engineering. I mean, there's a myriad of different professional and technical requirements in a mine. And, those sorts of things certainly could be to the advantage of the local people in Dubois and in Clark County. And I should say all of eastern Idaho, I guess.
Yeah. So like with today's economy, there's a lot of talk of inflation. You hear ads all the time about, people investing in gold.
Right.
There's different things like this. So is there, there will be an impact. The people in Clark County will benefit from the mining as far as there might be jobs available or things like that. But is there any overall economic benefit for lots and lots of people?
Well, it depends, I guess. As you said, there's been a move towards trying to encourage people to invest in precious metals, platinum, silver, gold, those sorts of things. And this last legislative session, trying to think, I know this last one for sure, even potentially the one before, one of the state legislators had put forth a bill that would require the state treasury, to invest in precious metals as well. It didn't get passed, but at least at that legislative level at the state, there is some push to try to get the state to invest in precious metals as well. The only downside there is it's volatile. I mean, it's gold prices fluctuate quite a bit, and so it's one thing to invest and know you have a good solid return on investment versus investing in something that may fluctuate considerably. So I think that's one of the reasons why that may not have passed, but there still is that push to get diversify the investments of the state and include gold and other precious metals as part of that portfolio.
The Kilgore site, what is the primary use of that land currently? Is it grazing? Is it?
So it's all, our project area is all on federal lands, so Forest Service lands. And Forest Service multiple use. So right now there are several grazing allotments on there. So it's used for grazing both cattle and sheep. And then it's used as recreational purposes. A lot of people camping and hiking out in that area. And then a lot of hunters in that area too, big game, deer, elk, those sorts of things. So it truly is, it's kind of a multiple use area that a lot of people use throughout the year.
But there's no impact as far as it won't impact people recreating or hunting or grazing.
No, I mean, at this point, the roads into the area that we're in, several of them have Forest Service gates. but that area was gated before we went in. And so the Forest Service is trying to limit some of the access into that area, vehicular access, I should say. You know, people can certainly get in there through horseback and hiking, those sorts of things. But yeah, it's an area that is well used, and it has been characterized by some of the environmental groups as somewhat of a pristine area. But as I said, you know, the area has been explored since the late 30s. So not only mineral exploration, there's mine roads all over the place in that area, but it's also been logged a number of times too. So there's been timber harvest in that area. So it truly is kind of a working land out there. So multiple use. Yeah.
Got it. Well, Phil, I appreciate information. Just before I let you go, I just wondered if you wanted to make any comment about just why mining is important in today's day and age. You know, why it's a worthy endeavor to pursue.
Yeah, good question, Rhett. And you know what I tell people is, and you've probably seen it on bumper stickers too. I mean, if you can't grow it, it has to be mined, right? So, you know, we have a lot of organic things that can be grown, and we can do a lot of that with plants and that sort of plants and animals. But really, when it comes to development of infrastructure or any sort of mechanical things that we have in our life, electronics as well, most of those are dependent upon minerals that have to be mined. A number of those minerals are mined domestically. The United States has quite a bit of mineral resources, but a lot of those minerals have to come from foreign sources. So we're dependent upon Russia and China and some other countries that, you know, we don't at this point have a real good relationship with. And the concern is they may cut us off from those sources of minerals. And so, you know, I'm involved in the exploration phase right now. So I think it's very important to explore our country to determine where those mineral resources are located, not necessarily to mine them at this point in time, but just to know where they are. And so strategically, and you know, for security reasons for our country, to know where those resources are and how and when we may be able to access those resources, I think is very important. Yeah, you know, mining is just really the end product of that process of really locating and determining where those resources are and how best to access them. And I think just to throw out one other comment here that we didn't touch on, but one of the concerns that has been expressed over the last few years about this project is that ultimately it's going to lead to an open pit gold mine. And the previous company, based on their limited research that they've done, they found gold mineralization near the surface of this project. And so their recommendation was that the project be pursued as an open pit mine where you access those minerals from the surface. Our exploration project now is drilling deeper holes to analyze the subsurface at a deeper level. And we're hopeful that the result of that exploration is going to show mineralization at a much deeper level, which would lend itself to an underground mine, which an underground mine is much less disruptive to the surface than a surface open pit mine. So again, that's all speculative. We won't know what that's going to be until we're done with our exploration and that economic analysis is done on how to move forward.